if they ain't demonstrating?
Well, hell, Jim Bob, all you got to do is just shoot yourself a Jew or a nigger. Chances are better than even you'll be shooting a commie anywho.
The state protects the Klan, and this makes it clear. They came through and they opened fire. They opened fire on us. And we fire back to protect ourselves.
In the midst of the Black Power movement, the Workers' Viewpoint Organization, or the WVO, focused on building a sense of class solidarity and mobilization, which they saw as crucial to the militantly anti-capitalist fight against social and economic injustices. In the late 70s, the WVO, having had little success in the past with unionizing white workers, was gaining presence in the town of Greensboro, North Carolina, for unionizing black workers in local textile factories, who had been long excluded from such jobs in the past. Greensboro itself had been a landmark of the civil rights movement of the 1960s, as a site for sit-ins and demonstrations to end segregation. The Greensboro WVO was committed to advocating against racial inequality, which they did by exposing police brutality against black people and protesting the Klan. At the same time the WVO was gaining steam, the Ku Klux Klan, which had peaked in membership in the 1960s, was gaining resurgence with the likes of David Duke, whose numerous TV and radio appearances marked a rebrand in the perception of the Klan. So-called well-groomed and professional, Duke proclaimed that the Klan was not anti-black, but simply pro-white and pro-Christian. By 1979, supporters of the WVO had been participating in protests against the Ku Klux Klan for months, not only for their brutal acts of violence, but for playing a role in heightening the racial animosity within the working class, which kept workers from unifying and fighting for their common rights. Tensions between the WVO and the Klan escalated when the WVO interrupted a Klan viewing of the Reconstructionist-era racist propaganda film, Birth of a Nation. The night ended with a standoff at the town hall between gun-wielding Klans members and WVO members who, brandishing sticks and bats, burned a Confederate flag in the yard and chanted anti-Klan slogans back at the racial slurs being hurled at them by Klans members. The WVO, which by this point had been renamed to the Communist Workers' Party, or the CWP, planned another march to take place 4 months later, the Death to the Klan March. The march was to take place starting in the Morningside Homes Black Housing Project and finishing at Greensboro City Hall. The group successfully secured a parade permit and designated route from the city on the condition that no CWP members were to carry any firearms. The CWP knew this condition violated their Second Amendment right, but they didn't push back since they didn't want to risk losing the permit, and they believed that police would be on site at the march to protect them from the Klan. In any case, they thought any firearms they did bring could simply be left in their cars until they needed them. Leading up to the march, the CWP openly challenged the Klan and advocated justified violence against them, stating, quote, "This is the only language they understand. Armed self-defense is the only defense." On November 3, 1979, CWP protesters began arriving at Morningside Homes just after 10:30 a.m., building picket signs and singing protest songs as local news media arrived to document the event, though there was a distinct lack of any police presence to be found at the protest. Less than an hour later, a 10-car caravan of Klansmen and members of the American Nazi Party who joined forces with them arrived at the march, heckling the protesters. The protesters responded, and some began beating the cars with their picket sticks. Just moments later, the first shot rang out from the front of the caravan. As TV cameras rolled, violence erupted in the streets of the Morningside neighborhood as Klansmen and Nazis ran from their cars to open fire on the protesters. The protesters scrambled to take shelter from the fire and retrieve their weapons to defend themselves. In the span of 88 seconds, 5 were murdered and 6 others were wounded. Police arrived minutes later to arrest several CWP members and 12 Klansmen and Nazis. Because there was no police presence at the march, 9 out of the 10 cars in the white supremacist caravan were able to quickly and easily flee. When radioed about the fleeing vehicles, police gave no order to stop them. CWP members and protesters, terrified and disoriented, accused the police of being involved in conspiring with the Klan to cause the deaths of the demonstrators. And as would soon come to light, police were well aware of the Klan's plans to attack the protesters. Leading the Klan's members was a paid FBI informant, Edward Dawson, who had received the map of the march from police officials. Despite Dawson's warning to police that the Klan intended to instigate violence, the police had made no plans to intervene. And by the time the caravan had reached the protest, they were being tailed by a police photographer and a detective. But even once the violence had started, they made no attempt whatsoever to intervene. A grand total of 16 out of the alleged 40 Klan and ANP members who participated in the violence were even arrested, only 5 of whom would be charged with murder. Edward Dawson, the KKK FBI informant, was not even called to testify at the trial. After a month-long trial and a week-long deliberation by an all-white jury, all 5 Klan and ANP members were found not guilty. It would only be a year later that a civil suit in federal district court brought by survivors of the attack against 2 Klansmen, 3 Nazis, 2 police officers, and 1 police informant awarded 2 of the survivors with a wrongful death settlement. In October of 2020, the Greensboro City Council voted to officially apologize for the police negligence and culpability in the violence, more than 40 years after the massacre.
So the ethno-state is an ideal that it would be a state for all people of the white race.
White nationalists marched through the streets. They carried torches and clashed with counter-protesters.
Well, I do think there's blame. Yes, I think there's blame on both sides.
Black Lives Matter! Black Lives Matter!
Where a peaceful black protest was met with violent police clashes, but a deadly insurrection left officers overrun.
What we see is that black folks simply, and people of color simply don't have the latitude to act out publicly, whether it's righteous or not. Many white Americans, it was as if they had just found out that white supremacy existed, that white supremacy is also intimately connected to law enforcement and even our military forces. You know, this is something that folks who've been fighting against white supremacy and dealing with anti-racist politics have long understood.